And I'll share my screen. All right, so welcome to day 3 of HTML2. We're going to be covering a couple things they're kind of niche concepts, but they're very useful whenever you do need them. We're going to be talking about the uh, maps, image maps, as well as some different ways that you can set up images and make them uh, able to be clicked on different locations. And I'll explain all that as we get through this. Let me get started with a VS Code. Before I do, did anyone have any questions about yesterday's assignment? I would like to review anything if anyone's confused on anything or has any questions about any of that.
I do have a question about the area label input thing that you wanted us to add.
The ARIA label on the input element?
Yeah.
Yeah, what's your question about it? Did you wanted to
Um.
see like an example of it, or do you just want me to explain it?
Yeah. Example.
Okay, so I'm gonna just, since I already have this demo up from yesterday, I'll actually just kind of build something out here real quick. Let's see, I'll clear out some of this extra stuff. I'll just clear out everything. I don't need all the extra stuff in here. So to use that properly, get rid of these styles. I'm going to put a form in. The form is going to be containing some inputs, and I'm using a formula just to kind of give you a good example of how this works. So I'll put an input element here, and this will be for the first name. So what I would want to do is type aria label, and whatever I type in here, this is going to be the instructions for the user. This is going to be what it tells you to write. So I would say enter your first name. And whenever the user gets to this input element, they're going to hear this, enter your first name, and they'll know that that's where they need to start typing. Then I can have another one. And this one could be enter your last name. We can do another input. We'll do this one as an email input. And we could also use placeholders in this as well that could say the same thing. The placeholder would show the text inside of the element, and the ARIA label will be read out loud. Placeholders aren't read out loud, but ARIA labels are. So this is where you would want to use something like that. Let's see here. We'll do another ARIA label. And this one would be enter your email. So basically, whenever you think ARIA label, think of specific instructions for the user. These are instructions for them to complete something on your page. If this were not on an input element, let's say this were on a modal element, you could have instructions on how to close the modal, how to save the modal if it has some sort of CRUD application. And I'm going to put one more here. We'll have a button for submit. And then we'll put an ARIA label here. And this will say, click here to submit. And that's what will be read to the user whenever they're using a screen reader. Does that help answer your question or clear up what the ARIA label is used for?
Yeah, because I was reading about where you don't want to use the ARIA label because it kind of becomes redundant. Like like if you want to do like a text area, maybe it's already explaining what it does, and you don't want to use the area label because it just confuses.
True. Also, if you have a role, the ARIA label and the role will both be red. So that could also add some more clutter. Sometimes you could put an ARIA label on the outside of your form, and you could just have it explain, just fill out this information here for sign up and leave it at that. And then each form or input area, you don't necessarily have to use it if you have. I would probably still include the label on the input just so that reads like tell your first name. It's not 100% required if you have the labels. Because the labels do get read, so if this just says first name, the label will be read as first name, and then the input area would say enter your first name. So that could sound a little redundant, and it is a good idea to have labels. Let me encapsulate this so that this is proper. So something like that. The idea, though, was just to get you familiar with the ARIA label, and just kind of understand how it works for the most part. And it's kind of hard to come up with specific examples without building anything too complex. But the form elements, this would be a spot where you could use it. But again, if you have a label, you don't necessarily need an ARIA label with it, unless you wanted to read the label in a different way. You could give more specific instructions saying like, enter a first name in all lowercase letters. Don't use any capital letters. Like you could give more specific instructions with the label that way. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And again, you can overuse them. Like you were saying, it can get really noisy in your screen readers if you have too much text areas. If you have instructions set through the label, or if you have text already in the text area, then those will be read, and you could get some redundancy with that. I would rather be a little bit redundant in some places than not have anything at all, though. There are times where something might get read twice, and I think I would rather have that behavior than risk not having it work at all. Some software isn't very good for some of this stuff, so and again, it also helps with search engine optimization as well. The search engine optimization part could be something you mainly wanted to focus on toward more, depending on what kind of application you're working on. Alrighty, so let me clear this out, unless you have any other questions about this, or anybody else has any questions. All right, let me clear this out then. So what we're going to do is talk about image maps. So image maps are a way to create a visual on your page. Let me actually use um, actually, I'm going to go to Figma. I don't want to stop screen sharing, so to bring up the whiteboard part of this. So I'm just going to go to Figma to show what I'm talking about, because without seeing one of these in person, or sorry, like on an actual application, it's hard to actually describe it in a way that's meaningful. So I'll just draw it out, and I think that'll make this a little bit easier. So let me log into Figma. And we'll just start a new FigJam. I'll click on this one. I'm not sure where the button went for new FigJams. And we'll get zoomed in here. Let me just throw a text area here to see how large this is. Okay, yeah, this would be seeable. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to grab an image real quick from Unsplash to show you what an image map could be. And what I'm going to find is a desk. And what I want to do is make this have a clickable area. So this is a nice top view image here. Here's another one we can use. I'll just grab a quick screenshot of that and throw that in my FigJam. So what you would do is you want to create an area on this image when this is on your HTML that is clickable. So if you wanted to click the pen, you could draw an area in HTML that would make it so whenever you click within this circle here, that it actually could go to a link, or it could pop up a modal. It could have some sort of interactivity on your page. It would make it so that clicking different parts of the image reveals more information. And it doesn't necessarily have to be an image like this. It doesn't have to be like an image element. It could be parts of your document. It could be a paragraph element. It could be any sort of thing that's on your page you're just going to tell it where the clickable areas are on your page. So if we wanted to click these glasses, for example, and then this would take us to a link to a eye doctor, perhaps, something like that, we could set that up pretty easily using the interactive clickable area. Another use case might be an interactive map for a tourism website. You would have a map of the city, and you'd click on different spots, and each spot you click on could be a landmark that pops up different things. Also, diagram-based quizzes is another use case where you click on the different parts of the diagram and it reveals more information. So does anyone have any questions about what we're kind of going for here today? All right. Yeah, so this is like the overall idea. We just want to make these areas here so that each one of these is its own link. It could be just a quick little pop-up modal. Whatever it is we do, we want to make sure that it's easy to find. So this is the basic idea. Let's bring up the W3 schools. I believe they have good documentation on this one. Because this is a little bit more of a complex, and I actually have a good image here too for this that shows this. So if I click on the computer, it takes us to a link to another page that has a computer on it and it gives us some information about it. We click on the coffee, it takes us to a picture of coffee. Completely unrelated image. You can see these are not the same coffee. They're just using another image, some sort of splash image here for this. They have one for the phone. So each piece of that is drawing. And if we look at the actual code here, they have the shape that they're using, and then they have these different coordinates that they're using to actually draw out the shape. The coordinates are kind of like how you would use absolute positioning to draw something out. And I'll show you how to actually do that. Um, I can probably put that in JavaScript so we actually get a little bit of a map drawn and be able to see what that looks like uh, with an actual outline. Because if you notice here, there's nothing that really indicates where the boundary is on the clickable spots. We just know that it's a rectangle. And in fact, like a little part of that corner of the computer there isn't clickable because it's just the way the shape of that is. And then of course right here, we have a little bit more clickable area. So it's not actually following the perfect shape of this computer. It's just a rectangle that goes around the computer and it's pretty close. And then here they have the href to the actual image. And it looks like they're using a HTML. This is a PHP based web page, so it's just redirecting to a new link. So again, if I click on that, it takes us to the computer.html site, and then we have another link to a wiki from there. So really good documentation on this. I think it gives a really good idea of how this is going to work. As far as the circle goes, the coordinates are a little bit hard to work with whenever you don't have any sort of visual. Um, for building out a circle, I've found that just best to use trial and error. You can create the element and then put a background color on it and just kind of watch how your mouse also interacts with it, or maybe give it a hover effect and you should be able to see the actual, I didn't mean to click on that, the actual image changing based on the hover. So again, the circle's a little bit tricky to get the correct numbers on just because it takes a little bit of math and you're trying to figure it out on an image that can change sizes dynamically. So you just have to kind of keep that in mind whenever you're working with this type of thing. We also have this map element. Let me bring this up on MDN. The map element, oh, that was the JavaScript map. The map element is the wrapper that we're using for the image map. It looks like they have a pretty cool one here too. I haven't actually been to MDNs before. Um, they're using this poly shape. This one's a really complicated one because you have multiple coordinates going on, and these are based on an XY coordinates. Um, you would start at 0 on one end, and you would draw to the other end of that coordinates for your starting point, and then it's an XY again. So that's how they're getting these these coordinates. There may be some tools. I haven't looked for that. I usually just do this with trial and error. I found that to be the easiest way for me to kind of get this drawn out, just because you just figure 130 pixels to the right, and then 147 up, 200 to the left. Again, the poly one's a little bit more complex, and whenever I show this with JavaScript, you'll see what the actual shaping looks like and how this is um, kind of coded in the background. Let's see, it looks like they're using polys for all of them here. So attributes that it can take. This is something you always want to look at when you're looking at elements on HTML, is what attributes are accepted on the element. So for example, if you're looking up an image element, it takes an src attribute and an alt attribute. So knowing what kind of attributes are available is definitely important for this. This element includes the global attributes. This would be like your ID, class, all of the normal HTML attributes that you could use are available. And we can actually see that complete list here under global attributes. In case you haven't looked at these before, I believe onClick is one of them. Yeah, it has all of the different event handlers here. We don't typically use the event handlers now since we're doing a lot of the events through JavaScript. So probably best to avoid using the onClick attribute whenever you can use document.add event listener and then pass in the click event that way. The browser can handle it. This one here's the one I'm referring to. The browser can handle it, but sometimes it can get a little bit buggy, especially when you're dealing with dynamic web pages where your JavaScript functions may not exist for a little bit of time, and the HTML is looking for that function, but it doesn't currently exist. And then it gets rendered in later. Maybe it loaded in through another page, and then these attributes can start breaking things. So for this one, we have the name attribute. This gives the map a name, so you can reference it. And it must be present. So keep that in mind. You must have a name attribute on your map. No white space characters. The value of name must not be the value of the name of another map. So it's a unique value. And if the ID is specified, they must have the same value. This is very similar to the for element, the for attribute on the label. I don't know if you've seen me use that there. Let me bring that back. This for, if I put this in here as first name, and I put an ID on this, the ID needs to also be first name. And if I put the name on here as well, the name also needs to be the same as the ID. So it's the same type of logic as this, where this attribute and these two attributes must match. Side note too, whenever you're dealing with the labels, you don't necessarily have to have a for attribute if you put the input inside of the label like I did here. So if I remove this input and I place it underneath of the label, then I need the for attribute. Whenever it's not inside though, see how we have this, the closing element here. Let me actually make this one line so it's a little more clear what I'm talking about. Then we have our content there. So this is the content of the label. This is the closing element of the label. If I have the input inside of the label, then we don't necessarily need the for attribute. It'll automatically know which one it's actually for because it's nested inside of it. So this is a design thing where if you prefer it this way, you can do it this way. One way isn't better than the other. It just comes down to what do you think is more readable. I typically do nest them inside of the label just because I find it easier to keep track of which one goes to which if it's inside of it. Either way is fine though, whichever you prefer. But back to the map, that has to have the name attribute, and the name attribute, if you have an ID, has to match the ID. So keep that in mind. Anytime you're using a name attribute and an ID, just make sure they're always the same. It doesn't matter which element you're working with, just make sure these are the same. And then the shape can be rectangle, which is RECT. It can be circle, or it can be poly. So based on what you place in there will determine how you set up your coordinates. So whenever you're dealing with a circle, it's going to have 3 coordinates, rectangles have 4, and polys have an unlimited number of coordinates. Let me scroll down through and see if there's anything else that is going to tell us about this. Just want to make sure we find everything here. See also area. So the area, if we look back at this example they show here, because I think W3 has a cleaner example of this, the area is nested inside of the map. So if we look at this, we also have an alt here. So this right here would be for your accessibility side of this. The alt is going to be read out on your image maps. So we want to make sure we're including an alt. And notice our image is outside of the map. We don't include it within the map. We have it on the outside. We have an alt text on that as well, explaining what the overall image is. And then we're using this attribute here called useMap. And the useMap has the hashtag here for the ID of the actual name of the map. Does anyone have any questions about any of this? Am I going too fast? Just want to make sure we're all understanding what we're doing here. All right, so let me open up VS Code, and I'll kind of draw out a rough version of one of these, and just kind of show you the how you would kind of make this work and how you would play around with these coordinates in order to get things kind of lined up where you want. The coordinates are a little bit tricky because this is like the bottom left corner, and then this is like the top right corner. Whenever you're dealing with a rectangle. So yeah, let's take a look at this. Let me remove this form element again. And first thing we're going to need is an image. I'm going to use a placeholder image. If you haven't seen this, placeholder.co, we can go there, placeholder.co or placehold.co. And it gives you these type of images here. Here is the size of the image. So we'll just click this, and we can drop this directly into our SRC. So we have an image now on our page, which I'll show you in a moment, and it's going to be 600 by 400. Always include your alt. Don't forget this attribute. This is an important one. This is what is rendered whenever the image is broken, and it's also what's read whenever a screen reader is being used, similar to an ARIA label. Also, it'll tell you the image on that this is an image whenever it's reading it. So you don't want to say image here or picture or anything like that, because then it would say image of, so it starts to repeat itself, and that's where that redundancy thing comes back in. So whenever you're using your alt text, you just want to be descriptive of what it is. In this case, it's a placeholder from placehold.co. Something also I've seen in alts before is attributions being given. If that's something you want to do, just to give credit, if you're using some artist pictures, you can include that as your alt text as well. Author of photo, placehold.co, something like that. You can do that as well. Then your alt text will read out every attribution as it's reading through the images. Also, you can inspect the page and see that come up. I typically include these within my README file or as a code comment. The code comment's a good way to do it, where you would just put it here, put that in my body. The code comment's a good way to do it because you can see these in the browser when you inspect the page. So you would say image from placehold.co, something along them lines, so you're giving attribution. So again, we want to keep that alt text and we want to keep that SRC. And does anyone remember what the third attribute was for this? For building out this map? Bring up the
Name.
docs again. What was that?
Name.
Name goes on the map one itself. So if I go back to the map here, this is where the name goes on the map. For the actual image, though, if we look at the example on W3 schools, it's use map. And then this use map needs to be tied in to the map element. All right, so let's go ahead and put one of those in. I'll place that here. Use map equals. I'm going to put in the ID symbol because it needs to know that this is an ID. It has to have that reference to it. And we'll just call it my map. Now I'm going to put in the map element, and this is going to be my map, like that. So this one is the ID being placed here, and this is the name here. So you can see the difference between these. We have the little octothorpe, hashtag, pound sign, whatever you call it, um, being used inside of the use map. And then inside of the name, we're not including that. We're just saying that it's my map. It's similar to CSS. Whenever we link an ID, we put in the octothorpe. Whenever we don't link the ID, we don't place it there. I'll expand this so I can put in the next element. So we'll go back to docs. It looks like the next one needs to be an area. So for each area, it draws a separate shape. I'm just going to copy this one in here, and then we will place this on our page. Again, the coordinates are going to be x-axis, y-axis, x-axis, y-axis. So that's how it reads those left to right. So we'll place this here. And again, we have the attribute shape. It's set to rect for rectangle. You want to make sure that you are putting these attributes in. These don't work without them. The alt text isn't technically required, but you need it for the accessibility of the actual image. So in this one, it's going to be part of placehold. And then what happens when we click on it? We have an href here. I'm just going to place a hashtag. We'll go hashtag bottom. And then at the bottom of the page, I'll create a section with an ID of bottom. And then within that section, I'll put a paragraph that says bottom of page. Does anyone have any questions about what I just did here with this href or section? Or somebody want to tell me, explain how this will work? If you think you have a guess.
When the person click on it, the hyperreference link is basically going to take them to the bottom of the page.
Exactly. It'll scroll right to the bottom. It'll find this element. I don't have enough content on my page for this to actually do any sort of scrolling, but we should see this show up in the actual window URL. We should see hashtag bottom show up there. So if we see that, then we know that this is wired up correctly. I could expand this out a little bit. Maybe I'll do that once I see what this looks like on the page. So here we have the image, and then as I slide my mouse slowly across it, we should see it turn into a cursor pointer right there. And if I keep going, we can see that it's no longer going to be a cursor pointer before the edge of the page. So I'll just mess around with these coordinates a little bit. We'll set this one to 0. And now we're at the edge of the page, but we're not at the top of the page. We have a gap there. So if I set this one to 0, let's see what that does. Look at that. We're all the way at the top, and we're all the way to the left. And then we have our width to the right. So this is based on pixels. Let me go to 50 here, so you can see how thin we are now, but we're still all the way to the top of the page, and we're all the way to the left, but we're only 50 pixels wide. And then we can change this one to 50 as well. And let's see if we can find the cursor. There it is. So we just have a tiny little square now, 50 by 50 pixels. Yes, Jordan.
So the coordinates looks like the first two is positioning and the second two are the size of the rectangle.
They're kind of all related to the size and the positioning together, because it's based on an actual like XY map. So it'll like plot the points on the image itself. So in a way, they're all the same, I guess, if that makes sense. Because if you change, I can change the positioning based on these numbers here, but I can also change the positioning based on these numbers here, just because of it'll stretch at one side and then we can shrink the other side. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's drawing like a horizontal line starting at one point, but if we say to start from a different point, then it changes the positioning, but it also changes the length. So it's a little weird to wrap your head around without actually having the visual. But I can create that visual, as long as I
So,
have. Yeah,
I
go
have
ahead.
a question. So, does that mean like with the polygon, for instance, you said it can be as many numbers as you want. So, however many numbers it is, you divide it in half for the first set of points, and then the other half is the other set of points. Because it's what, four for a rectangle, because you need 4 points for the rectangle. So
Correct.
you're essentially setting the each one, and then the length of the line is equal to the second number that you have to use, um, the positioning of that number.
I'm not. To be honest with you, I'm not 100% sure on the math on the polygon. I do know that when you have four numbers and it's set to poly, it does make the rectangle. I'm not sure how it calculates the next set of points. I think if you put them in, it'll create an XY. Is that kind of what you were thinking too, or?
Something like that is what I was thinking.
Yeah, it's. I would have to do a little bit more research on poly. I've actually never used one before. I would typically just either use a circle or a rectangle if I were going to draw something like this out. And I've only ever actually used it like, and it wasn't a real application. It was just me building one out just to see what it would, how I could make it work. I created a little Pokemon trading card thing where I had a picture of a Pokédex and I animated all the buttons on it so that you could scroll through the different Pokemon. It was very, very simple. And I just had circles for the A and B buttons and then a rectangle for the left and right and up and down buttons on that. So the polygon isn't something I've explored all that much myself. I do know that it is a little bit more complicated than just plugging in numbers. If I were to implement some JavaScript with that, I might be able to create a outline map that could follow exactly what's happening by reading the coordinates. I haven't experimented that much with it though. Um, it is XY. I do know that it's XY on the polygon though for each set of coordinates. So that should create points. And then I'm not sure how it decides on how they're intersecting. If we look at the MDN one here where it has a polygon being used, so like this is a set of XY, this is a set of XY, this is a set of XY, and this is a set of XY. Um, and I'm not sure even exactly what shape that it's drawing within this. It looks like it's each one of those is a map. Okay, so this is the first piece here. It makes like a diamond, and then it looks like they're drawing out each color, each section of this triangle here. So if we look at these coordinates, we could actually reverse engineer this to figure out exactly how this works based on that. So if we look at the infographic poly, they don't have alts on. Oh, they do have one down here. That's on
So,
the. What's that? I'm sorry.
so, so what it seems like to me, so like each point, it's what each one, so the 130 and the 147, are they, so how, my question is, do they do X, Y, or do you do all X and then all Y?
They do X,
Because I
Y.
know,
So every single one of these is starting with the same coordinates, so that would be the center point. So if we look here,
okay, so
130, 147. Yeah, I know each one of these is XY pairs. Um, but again, like I'm not sure exactly how they decide on which one connects to which. So we're saying here, it looks like we are in the HTML section. So we start here, and then we are 200 by the 107 from the top. So that would put us there, I guess. And then 254, so that puts us over to this edge, and then 219 from the top, so that puts us down there. But I don't know like how it determines what direction that it's going to be going. I guess it's based on the order you put them in. Um, it's a
So it
little
just
bit.
follows the order and plots it out,
Yeah, that's what it looks like to me.
most likely.
Yeah, so then it just draws out this shape here. But then it
Okay, so
knows to
like if we
reconnect back to the first one after the last coordinates are in. Because see how this one's 130 at the x coordinate. This is 130 x coordinate, so that puts us right here. And then the 228. So we did tell it to go back to the start. Oh no, wait, no, we didn't. We
then it's from the top,
147.
right?
Yeah, it's from the
So it would
top.
be
You're
from
right.
the
Yeah,
top.
yeah. So from here down. Yeah, it's very interesting. If you want to mess with poly, go for it. Um, it is
I
it
think
is
I have
quite
an idea about
complex.
what exactly. I think it just basically like each point you do your X Y in each point, and it draws from where you start, and then wherever you end it, you want to end it to make the final form or whatever to make that final line connect to your starting line.
Yeah, that makes sense. Again, I'm not an expert on poly. I stick with the rectangle and the circle just because I feel like they're good enough. I could build a rectangle or a circle inside of this, and you could find the click spot and click on it. But if you want to be precise and build something out like this, that's more power to you. That's really cool. I don't think maybe the small detail is worth it, but I don't personally think that it's worth creating this something this complex, unless you have a really good understanding of how this is going to be shaped out. My my issue with this is the dynamic nature of the images that we'd typically be using, fluid size images. Whenever you have an image like this, one thing to keep in mind is you can't change the size of the image. It has to be exactly this size. Otherwise, your shape will start to change based on where it is on the image. So the image would get larger, but your shape is not getting larger. So that's one thing to keep in mind with these. They're very cool, but they're not very good for being on multiple screen sizes without redoing all of this information. Keep in mind, you can change all of these coordinates through JavaScript. You can update any attribute on any HTML element through JavaScript. So if you wanted to, based on your screen size, you could change this from poly to a circle. You could swap this image out for a completely different image, and you could go from there. Or you could create these coordinates dynamically through JavaScript, and as this image expands, these coordinates are updating live. So that is an option. So great questions there. I am going to build out a very similar example of what we were looking at before. And when I do, I'll actually draw out some lines in JavaScript so that we can see the boundaries of this and how it works out. I'll do that in the second hour. This one's just going to be more of the how this would work. Does anyone have any questions about it? I know this is a lot to take in. There's a lot of like little things going on here, especially on MDN's version of this. We have yeah, there's just a lot here. Their href, we can see there's an attribute here tied into this. Does anyone know what this does? This target equals blank. Has anyone ever seen that before? Yeah, that's something I'll bring up with the when I get into anchor tags. I'll show you how this works on an anchor tag as well. Essentially, these areas are anchor tags. They work like a link. So these are the same attributes that you have on a link, other than the alt, the href and the target. So let me just get this one working here. Let's see, we got our rectangle. I haven't clicked on it yet, so let me do that, and we'll see that it gives us that correct URL. So I have it to 50 by 50. I click that and we see the bottom shows up there. So if this were down further on the screen, this would have scrolled to it. We can see that it showed up there in the URL. Let me just delete that and click again. I got to refresh. So yeah, clicking there gives me that. That's just a quick way to navigate down to something. Let me show you the target blank, and I'll show you what that does. It's a very useful thing. You might use this whenever you don't want to close the current page you're on. So here's target blank. Now I click on this and we can see it opened a new tab. So the new tab would also be scrolled down to the bottom of the page. I have two tabs open now. So if I click that again, you can see that tab open up. So that's all that the target blank does, is just opens a new tab and makes it so you can not lose your spot on your page. This is especially useful for multi-page applications, because sometimes whenever you have a new tab, whenever you have a page like this, you don't want to lose your state. If you remember with your JavaScript, whenever you have a script running on your page, if you refresh the page, all of your work is gone. If it could be a form element, it could be, you were working on things. Anytime you click on a new link, it will actually or just erase all of your state. It'll reload the page, and if you had stuff that was being stored in JavaScript, it's all started over. All of your variables were cleared. So creating a link to a new page is useful if you just want to show them something without navigating away from where you're currently at. It's good for just maintaining state. It's also good for performance because you don't have to reload the page whenever you go back. You can just close the tab and we're back where we started again. So definitely useful. That is something we'll get into more tomorrow. We'll be actually using that whenever we create links. We'll be getting into some anchor tags and you'll get to a little bit more practice with that. So I'll be going over that again. As far as the map goes, does anyone have any questions about it? Somebody want to tell me how to put another clickable area on the bottom right corner here? Now we know the size of this image here.
So would it be it's X, Y positions, right?
Yes.
So you'd put another area.
Yeah, I'll just copy and paste that one. I'll clear out the
But the
coordinates.
coordinates, you would start off at what? 600, 400, or no, 600, 400 would be the last ones you would need. Or so what would do what? 350, 450. Is it that? I think it's that way, right? Is it the top, bottom, X, Y?
So this would be your left and right. So
Left
350. So I
and that,
believe this should be 550 here. And this should
and
be
that should be
600. Sorry, no, this would be your up and down. It is confusing to think about. From the top, this would also be 550. And then these ones, I believe, would be 600 and 600, right?
is the image 600, 600, 600, 400? It's 600, 400.
Oh, you're right. It is
So
400. Yeah, it's so confusing to think about this whenever
that's
you're
where I was
going
trying.
upside down.
That's what I was trying to think of, like which numbers were the. So so what do you
And this is why
350?
whenever I do these, I have to I'll do a lot of
I
trial and
think that
error.
one's 400, and I think the first one's 350.
You mean over here?
Yes,
350, 550,
550,
400,
400, 600.
600. Let's see what we get.
I might get the 600, 400 might be mixed up. Okay, no, so the 400, 600's mixed. We gotta swap them up. 400 be second, 600 first,
Yeah, so
and then
350 to 600.
or it'll be 550. You want to switch to 350 and the 552 because the 550 is going to end up putting you too far for the 400.
That makes sense to me, yeah. We want to be left and right. And there it is. Good job. Again, it's a lot of trial and error to get these in the right place. There is a little bit of math we can do, and like a little bit, if you put a little bit of thought to in it, you guess you don't need the trial and error, because we know this is a 600 pixel image, so we know that, and that's how you got that, 550 to the right.
Yes,
And then you got to
exactly.
think the top,
Did
we are
that.
400 pixels tall, so the top we want to be 350 pixels down, and then we're going to go all the way to the
It
right.
makes sense that it's this is 550 first because the way the image says it's 600 by 400. So the 550 being first since it's 600 first.
Yes. Yeah. So again, these are confusing to try to figure out. Um, so don't feel bad if you have a hard time with these, especially whenever you don't have any way to really visualize it other than your cursor changing. You're like right there. We might. I've never tried this on the area itself. I might be able to put a style on it. We could try an outline. Yeah, that's the only problem with this type of thing is it's not an actual element. There's no content in it, so there's nothing to really give it a size. I suppose we could try to give it a size. I've never tried that before either. It's always cool to like mess around with these type of things just because you might figure something out that you haven't tried before. Yeah, we can't add any content to that. Width, height, nothing. So the area itself has its own setup. You just have to use the coordinates, and it just has that. But that's where you can use JavaScript to overlay it. And again, I'm going to show that after our break. If anybody else has any questions, we can get those now. Otherwise, I'll get the 10-minute timer started. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, and then, again, just don't forget about the alts on these. We want to make sure that you're keeping these accessible. That's um, the main topic of this week is accessibility and SEO. So alt text is important. The target, not so much. We can leave that off. The href, we don't necessarily need an href. Um, there is other things we could do here. The href's good if you're creating a link to something, but we could do the on click. Now I said about the event listeners. This area is kind of a specialized thing. You can put an ID on this. You can put an event listener on it. You can also create this on click where you can write JavaScript. We could try alert info. And if I click that, where's my, it's like I broke the cursor on that one. There we go. So you can put the on clicks and you can write JavaScript. You can call your JavaScript functions from your script file and make these run. So you can, bind your JavaScript functions to this. So instead of redirecting you a new page, you could have it redo everything on your page. You could have JavaScript say, okay, now that you clicked on this, let's get rid of this image. Let's get rid of all this stuff. Let's put all new content here. And then, go into another page basically, but it's the same page. We're not going to change the URL. We're just going to repaint the entire page when on you click this. And then you might click a close button. It'll wipe out everything and come back to this original one here. So you could store your entire inner HTML of your document into a variable and then switch it to a different inner HTML on your body and then switch back whenever you close that. So a lot of possibilities with that. Sky's the limit, as they say. There's a lot of things you can do with something where you can draw invisible click areas. And again, you can put these anywhere on your document. You don't have to bind it to an image. You can bind this to any sort of HTML element. Because remember, we're actually using this use map attribute to bind it. So you could put use map on anything. You just have to know the size of it. We could put use map on the body, and we could make our entire body of our document a clickable map. And then we just build our map here, we put our areas in, and we have all of our clickable areas everywhere on our page. It would make a really interesting page. I don't think I've ever seen anyone actually use um, the use map attribute in that way before. So you might be able to come up with some unique stuff, maybe some sort of cool interactive HTML based games. There's probably not a whole lot of people creating anything like that other than using a canvas. The canvas element, you can create games in this that actually will draw things out. So if there's no questions, I'm going to go ahead and open our 10-minute timer. Let me try the timer inside of the classroom here, and we'll just see how that works. Let me know if you can see it first off. Timer, 10 minutes. Is everyone able to see the timer? All right. So I'll see you in 10. I see a loophole in your plan there, Katie. If she don't drink it, All right, welcome back. All right, so I'm just going to pick right back up on this again. For the second half of this, I want to do a little bit more realistic image and just kind of build something out that you would maybe use, kind of like how I was doing with the Unsplash. I'm not going to make a pen. I'm not going to, because I don't want to use the polys. It would take me too long to figure out all the coordinates on them. So I'm just going to do something that I can put a rectangle on, well, maybe a couple rectangles, a circle, and we'll just take a look and see what I can come up with here. I believe I can use the, just want to check this real quick to make sure this API still works. That one doesn't anymore. All right, that's okay. I can just use Unsplash for the images. So there's an Unsplash API if you haven't used this before. What it does is it allows you to get a random image, and we can use that to create our actual map here. So I'm going to start this all over again because we want to see this being built out from the beginning. That way we just have a good understanding on the process of this, and we're not going to be confused with all the extra clutter on the page. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create an H1. The reason I'm creating an H1 is because we're thinking about accessibility, we're thinking about that hierarchy. You want to have an H1 on your page for SEO. So that this, again, this isn't part of the map, but this is part of building any sort of web application. And we're going to have an interactive city map with clickable areas, something that describes our page for the SEO. If we wanted to, we could put a paragraph here next, and this interactive map showcases various clickable areas. And does anyone remember how to bind these together? How would I bind my H1 in this paragraph together?
Is it area labeled by?
Exactly. I see your hands up, Jordan. Did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, the H1 would have the ID in the paragraph would have the aria.
Exactly. Thank you.
Aria labeled by, I think.
Yeah, the aria label by. So what would we want to name these? What makes sense for what we're actually doing here? Could call it maybe heading or header, something that describes the top of the page. And then again, these need to match. Because this is a header, I'm going to put this in a header element. And that's just the top of our page. We just want to make sure that, we're practicing this responsiveness, sorry, not responsiveness, this accessible structure. We're using the semantic HTML. We have our header, H1, paragraph. We're using the proper hierarchy. Next, I'm going to put an H2, and this is going to be the map area. And then I'm actually going to put this inside of a main so that I'm encapsulating all of my content that is being described. And now I'm actually going to start building out my map area. We're going to start with an image. I always start with an image when I'm building out a map. The reason for that is it's easier to figure out exactly what your coordinates are going to be when you actually have something to look at. I could create a rectangle right now, but it doesn't really do us much good if we don't know where to put the rectangle. So we'll start with an image. And this is the API I was talking about. The URL is https://source.unsplash.com/random. And then after random, we put a question mark here. The question mark stands for query. It's what we're actually searching for. And you can put as many parameters as you want here, separated by commas. I'm going to put city, comma, night. And then the alt text would describe the image. So I'll just say interactive city map because this is going to be our interactive map that allows the users to click on it. And is there anything I'm missing here to make this work properly?
Don't you got a name and a map?
It's not the name property we're looking for, but it is an attribute that's related to that.
Is it use map?
It's use map. Thank you. And then inside of here, assuming I have an ID of city map, what do I need to put inside of the use map? I'll actually create that too.
You want to put interactive city map?
I just named it city map. So up here, I also want to call it city map, but there's a character that I need to put in first. Which character was that again?
Hashtag.
Yes, the hashtag city map. So this is just telling it that it's referring to this name down here. I don't know why we need the hashtag. It's just something that they decided to do. Maybe you can use other properties. I haven't looked into that myself. Maybe you can have this set as a class and you could put a dot there, but I don't know. I just do it this way because this is the way the documentation says to do it. So, and I haven't experimented with this to see what other capabilities you have. But this right here works. So this is the way we're going to do it. So we have our use map, our source, and our alt. Is there anything else you think I should put on this image?
Should we add like a width or a height?
Yeah, we want to have a width on it at minimum. That way we have some sort of reference that we can base this off of. I think this still works. Let's double check. Yeah, so we're 600 wide. This is our map area. And what we can do now is one thing to keep in mind whenever I'm showing you this with the random, every time you refresh, you get a different image. So keep in mind the height's going to change. If I set the height on this, it's going to mess with the aspect ratio if it even allows me to set a height. Let's say 600 for that as well. If I keep refreshing though, you'll see that some of these images get distorted. Like this one here, you can tell that it's not supposed to look like that. If we want to keep a height on it, we can. I think I'm okay with keeping the height. That's fine. Just remember that the coordinates are from the top of the image down. So as long as you have a small enough clickable area, whatever your height is isn't that big of a deal. So not including one would at least keep your aspect ratios the same. There is a way to prevent this from happening with the aspect ratios where you would put this inside of a container and then you would set the size of the container and then scale the image so that it fits within the container and it would self crop the pieces off that doesn't fit. Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay, and then if you're not sure what I mean by that, that is something we'll get into in CSS. So if that's not crystal clear on what I mean by the aspect ratios and that, I will explain all that again later. I don't want to get too much into making this into a CSS class, but we would put a wrapper around it and then set the height and width on the wrapper instead of the image. All right, so back on the map, I already gave it a name. One thing to notice here, let me just undo this. Whenever I create the map using Emmet, it already wants me to put a name on it. Remember, the name is required, and if you're using the Emmet shortcut, it will just populate this part for you, and you can just plug in your city name there. All right, so what goes inside of the city map?
An area.
Yes, we need an area in here. So whenever I did the autocomplete, it gave me all of the required attributes, which was what I was just about to ask. So here's all the required attributes. We have a shape, we have chords for coordinates, href, and alt. So if I wanted to make a rectangular shape, does anyone remember what I put here?
RECT.
That's it. RECT. I believe we could put poly there as well. I wouldn't though. We want to make sure that we're clear on what this shape actually is. So we're going to use the RECT. And then coordinates, I'm just going to plug in some random coordinates. We'll do 34, 44, 270, and 350. They just happen to be the same as what we used on W3 schools. And then for our href, I'm going to put in a redirect URL. This is another API you can use when you're designing really basic web applications. This is https //www.example.com. We could put whatever we want after the .com, such as landmark one. And whenever we click on this, it'll redirect us to this page, and it just generates some generic text based on whatever's put here. So it's just a way to test out URLs. It's a way to test out anchor tags. And it just kind of like it's a placeholder for whenever you're just building out a layout template. So feel free to use example.com. You'll also see this sometimes with email addresses. The domain will be at example.com. That's an actual like testing email platform you can plug in for if you're writing like actual scripts that test out your code. Instead of trying a real email, you could just put in email at example.com, and it'll try to send an email to that, and then it sends an HTTP response in return. So you can retrieve that and make sure that it actually sent. So just an interesting little tidbit there for testing things. This one here was something that somebody showed me a couple months back. Super useful, just to generate a quick image. You can also, there's other properties you can put in here. You can actually get the height and width coming right out of this. I just use these properties here. They work just fine. And then our alt. What do we put in for the alt? So I suppose it would depend on the image, but the alt would want to describe a piece of the image. So for this image here, maybe we'd have a rectangle around, well, I guess it'd be around this building based on where I put that. So, or maybe a little bit, it'd be a little bit lower than that. But I could put like building, something along them lines. We can actually see the hand there is actually right on that building. So I'll put that as my alt, even though it's going to change the image as soon as I do this. So our alt is building. And we can see that showing up on our page there now. But this is where I was talking about. Let me just do a couple more, and then I'm actually going to build out a little bit of JavaScript to show us those images. So just so we can see that. And it's an interesting thing too to make. We'll do a circle. We'll start off with the area. Shape is circle. So the coordinates are your x, y, and I believe the other one is the, I want to say radius. I think that's what they said in the, let me go back to the MDN. I think it was radius for the circle, or maybe it was on W3. Circle defines a circular region. Here we go. So yes, it's the radius. So we're going to specify the coordinates, the XY coordinates, followed by the radius. So the third one is the radius. We'll have 3 coordinates there, and that's how we're going to get our circle. So for the coordinates, I'm going to put in 500, 300, and 45 for our radius. Href, we'll do example.com, /park. Alt text, we'll just put in park for the alt text. And that completes the next area. So we should be able to see that responding here. Where did we put that? 5 and 3. See if we can find it just by, right there it is. So it's hard to tell that it's a circle, but again, I'll throw in some JavaScript so we can see that. And then I'll just throw in one more for a poly. Area shape is poly. Coordinates, I'll throw in a whole bunch of coordinates, 300, 150, 400, 250, 350, 300. And then our href will be example.com/riverfront. And alt will be riverfront. So we're just describing the area that we're going to be clicking on this way. And we should have some sort of poly going on in here. There's the circle. There it is. I have no way to tell exactly what shape I just made, but I will do some JavaScript so we can at least get the circle and the rectangle. To do that, let me create a CSS file. I could just do this as inline, but that's okay. So I'll create a highlight area. And we'll set this position absolute. We're doing position absolute so that it's exactly on top of the image. I'm going to overlay it. Absolute positioning takes things out of the flow of the document. It makes it so it doesn't push content around the page. We'll do a border solid red and pointer events none. We want the pointer events to be coming from the actual area instead of the highlighted area. Okay, so I'm going to create, we already have an app.js, I'll just use this. Use strict. I didn't put anything in here yet. Believe I can just add that through the JavaScript. Yeah, we'll just put the class on through the JavaScript because I'm going to generate this element using JavaScript, so I won't actually be able to access it otherwise. So we'll create a document dot query selector all. We're going to select all of the areas. This returns an array. So because we have an array, we can loop over it using this for each method. I'm going to be moving kind of fast on this just because this isn't really the main point of the class, knowing how to build this out. And it's a little bit more complex than what I would want to explain right now as well, just because it goes into a little bit of the manipulation, destructuring. It's going to be just too complex to explain it all in an hour. But we will get into this more when we actually talk about JavaScript on how to build something like this out fairly easily. We're going to put an event listener on it. And again, I'm also looking through my notes to do this. I don't have this all memorized, so don't think that this is something that you're going to want to memorize eventually. All right, so we create our event listener, a callback function. We're using the mouse enter. So as soon as I mouse over that area, this is when we're actually going to create this. We need to get the coordinates. We'll do this with the split method. So we're accessing the area, and then we're going to access the attribute for chords, and then we're going to split these into an array. And it's comma separated, and then we're going to map over that. Map returns an array, and it loops over it at the same time. It's sort of like doing a for loop and creating an array all at once. Our callback function for this will take each coordinate and it will turn it into an integer because currently they are strings. So we'll do chord, and we'll change those to be base 10 decimal. And we'll do the shape next equals area dot get attribute shape. And then we're going to actually create the highlighted area. So we'll just call this highlight area. I'm going to use document.createElement for this. And I'll actually paste all this code into the chat so that if you want to mess around with this, you'll have it. You can look through this and play with it and try to maybe reverse engineer it into understanding it if you're interested in it. If not, don't worry about it because it's not something you would typically build out other than for demonstration purposes. So we're oops. I just did the same create element and we're creating a div. Okay, so now we'll add a class name to the highlight div. I should be able to just, I'll do them on 2 lines. Highlight div dot class name equals, and we're going to use that same class name that I put into the CSS so that it actually will style it as soon as it creates it. All right, so next is a conditional. We're going to check if it's a rectangle, if shape strictly equals rect. So remember, we're grabbing the attribute off of the HTML element. We're looking for the attribute called shape. We're checking the value of that shape to see if it's a rectangle. If it is a rectangle, then we want to get the properties off of it. So this is the destructuring I was talking about. I'm going to declare 4 variables at once, but I'm going to be pulling them out of an array. So I put array brackets here, and it will actually grab each element and assign these to a variable. If that doesn't make sense yet, it will when we go over the JavaScript part of this again. If destructuring is something you want to look into a little bit, feel free. But remember, chords is an array. We know that because this map method returns an array, and also split creates an array. So chords is an array, and we know that the coordinates have 4 coordinates in it, and we're assigning each element. Element 0 is left, element 1 is top, element 2 is right, and element 4 is bottom. So we're just creating 4 variables at the same time, and we're pulling that right out of the array. I could use indexing and do the exact same thing. I say chords at 0 equals left, and then create 4 separate variables. But destructuring is a better approach to that, so that's why I'm just doing it here. Highlight div dot style. This is where we're actually going to be creating the borders on this. So highlight div dot style dot left equals, we'll use the string template literals. If you haven't seen these are used for putting variables inside of your strings without worrying about concatenation, or if you just forgot what I was talking about. The backticks, that's a string template literal, and you can just inject variables with that $ curly bracket syntax. Let me just copy and paste this a few times. So we're going to have left. This one's going to represent, where's my, here we go. 2, 3, 4. So we have left, top, width, height. So this is left, top, width, and height. One thing too, this might help you understand the coordinates if you were at all confused about them. Top, right, and bottom. We actually need to subtract those. Right minus left, and bottom minus top. So this will create the outline around the rectangle. Now I'll do the circle. It'll be the exact same process. Shape strictly equals circle. Remember, the shape is the attribute from the HTML, and we assigned it a value of rect and circle, and then we will create or get our coordinates. We'll destructure x, y, and radius equals chords. And then it's the same thing as above. I'll just copy and paste this and then just change the values inside of the template literal. So we have our left, our right, our width, and our height. Here we'll have x minus radius. Instead of top, we will have y minus radius. And then for right, this will be radius times 2. And our height is also radius times 2. And then the last thing we need to do is actually put a border radius on this because we want this to be a circular element. If we don't have the border radius, it'll come out as a rectangle. The border radius, I spelled highlight wrong. So letting my tools help me there. I didn't have the correct coloring. That's why I knew that that was spelled wrong. That will create all of that. So then the last thing we need to do is actually put a event listener on for when we mouse over it, and it will append it to the page. So document dot get element by ID. What did we call that? Where's our map? City map. And we'll just chain this in. So we're going to get the element by ID, but we actually want to get the parent node, which is the parent of what we're actually selecting. This is a neat little trick where you can create siblings, and then we append child to the parent, and it creates a sibling element. And because it's set to absolute positioning, whenever we put in the element, it'll be right on top of its sibling element. And then we'll just add area.add event listener. This is a mouse leave event. Mouse leave is for like when you moused over something and then you are no longer mousing over it. Callback function, we just want to remove the div. Highlight div dot remove. And then we'll put in another option called once. This will just clean up our event listener so it's no longer listening for it once it's removed. Okay, so let's see if everything's working. Oh, I never linked it in. And we also got to do the CSS. So our C app.js link styles.css. Let's see if we have any errors. So I didn't find my ID. Let's see if I spelled it wrong. When I read the error, I can see cannot read properties of null reading parent node, which means that whatever I chained the parent node off of is currently null. So when it tried to read the script, it didn't find the ID. So where's document.get element by ID? I passed in city map. Let's look at index here. City map is the name. ID equals city map. There it is. So it didn't draw it quite in the right spot. So I'd have to adjust my coordinates a little bit, but we are getting a rectangle. So I think it's due to the image sizes. Let me refresh. Sorry, let me just remove this height. Interesting. It looks like we're about 100 pixels off, so I'd have to adjust our height on that. Yeah, it's almost exactly. It's just on the y-axis. I probably have a typo in here. Top is pixels. right is being subtracted from left, bottom from top. But at least we can see, even though it's in the wrong spot, we can see exactly the size of the shape. I'll have to adjust. I'm going to give you this code anyway. That way you can implement this and play around with it. Whenever I get it corrected, and these are actually drawing in the right spot, I'll send you the corrected version of it. Let me just put this in the class Slack. I'll create a thread for this so I'm not taking up the whole thing. There we go. So I dropped that code block in there. So if you want to mess around with that, feel free. Again, we're like 100 pixels off on the height. If you want to try to figure out how to do the poly, feel free to try it. I didn't put it in because you would have to get dynamic number of parameters for poly. I'm not sure why that's off by that much. It could be the image is being pushed down. Maybe if I remove the content above it. Last time I tested this, I didn't have a header here. So it's a little bit closer. Because we're using absolute positioning, maybe I need to set the parent to this to relative so that we're relative to the image rather than style, be position relative. Yeah, that's what it was, I think. Nope, we're still a little bit off. It is a little closer. Oh, I still have this here. Yeah, that's interesting that the absolute positioning isn't accounting for the, and it has that little bit of margin at the top of the page there, so that's what's pushing me down a little bit. So it's the relative positioning that was throwing it off, but it's pretty close. We can see exactly where these clickable areas are now that we have that script. So we get a better idea of what the shapes look like and how that would be affected on the page. You could include this script on your page if you wanted to actually make that. I feel like this was a little bit more accessible now because you can actually see the area that you're clicking on and you're seeing what you're trying to select. So feel free to use that anytime you want. You can throw that script into your pages if you're building these clickable maps and to get this highlight around. The issue again is the absolute positioning is going, instead of going off of the image, it's going off of the entire document. So I think I would need to encapsulate the positioning to be on, maybe I need to put it on the map. Can't tell if that's fixed. Let me put back in the content here. I don't have the header anymore, but that should be enough to see. Yeah, it's still off by a little bit. Again, it's one of them scripts. Well, it's not perfect, so you just have to kind of adjust it for your needs. Does anyone have any questions about the area map though? This is actually all the topic that I have for today. I just wanted to, throw something a little interesting in here so we could play with this a little bit with this highlight thing. I apologize that it isn't putting it in the right spot up and down wise. Maybe if I have a CSS reset, it'll work a little bit better. But well, again, it's one of those things you can mess with on the styles to see if you can get it to work correctly. It's be kind of a challenge for you if you want to use that. Any questions?
Possibly post the style you have in there as well.
Oh yeah, yeah, the
So we have it.
CSS. Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for reminding me of that. Yeah, just consider it like a stretch goal if you want to try to get that working with the highlight. And if you really want to take it a step further, mess with it with the poly. See if you can get it to highlight the poly areas. Um, but yeah, this is basically the idea of the map areas. It is a little bit more advanced thing. It's something that you don't typically see a whole lot because a lot of people don't understand it. And you can see by the MDN documentation, they didn't do it any justice here. It just looks really intimidating when you look at this code here. There's a whole lot of stuff going on. And I think most developers would see this and just kind of like, I think I'm going to try a different approach. I'll just use absolute positioning on stuff and put event listeners on them, which is typically the approach you'll see. And then things break whenever you resize them. This target blank, again, that's just for opening a new tab. I feel like they could have went without this. Like if I delete that, then it cleans this up a little bit. And if they would have put this inside of a variable or maybe just made it something shorter, it could have really made this a lot easier to understand what was happening here. So fortunately, we have a really good example here on W3 Schools. Feel free to come to W3 Schools and look at this. Let me bring up today's assignment because today's assignment is creating an image map. And
Can you
it's,
see your HTML for a
yeah,
second?
absolutely. Which part of it did you need to see?
Um, just the whole.
The whole thing?
Yeah, I was just looking at the whole thing.
Okay, so I'm near the top. Now I'm at the top.
Okay. And you had tried using the image relative earlier, right?
Yeah.
Um, wouldn't you?
Let me look back
Okay.
at the JavaScript. So we're getting the city map, and we're getting the city map here. The problem is it's a sibling.
It looks like you're just creating the division on top of the HTML file, is what it looks like. You're not creating it inside of the area, inside of the map area.
Right, I'm creating it as a
Yeah,
sibling. So I think I just fixed it. Nope,
that's
I'm
what I
off a little
was.
bit.
It, the division is was originally being created on top of the just on top of the element without having to.
It still is. It should be anyway. It should be overlaying. So that's actually a lot better there. What I changed was I put the main on relative positioning because this is the parent element, and because the main is position relative, my coordinates on the absolute positioning are going to be relative to the main now. So it'll overlay exactly with these coordinates here because it's going to use those. That's where I'm getting the coordinates from, is that actual element right here. So that fixes it a bit. But whenever I add other siblings
Could
in
you
there,
post the HTML in there in the Slack for me so I could just do the whole thing and because I have an idea of
yeah.
what might need to be.
So what you could do, I think, to make this a little bit cleaner is
Maybe it's the
put a div here.
can you make the map is it possible to make the map have the position relative?
Well, that's the thing. We're not the map isn't having a child, isn't receiving the child from the JavaScript. This city map right here, we're selecting it and then we're applying it to the parent.
Okay.
So the div is going on the parent of city map, which I just wrapped in a
Yeah,
div.
but it
So now if I set this div, which is the parent, to position relative, then I should be able to put my h2 back in here. I'll put an h1, and it says hello, and then this should be lined up now correctly, and it is. So that fixed it. And there's the
okay.
circle.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So I'm actually glad you brought that up because it's one of those bugs where like I want to get it figured out. And that's what it was. It was the absolute positioning. Whenever you're using absolute positioning, absolute is relative to whatever the parent is. And in this case, this div is now the parent. I told it to be relative to absolute. So it'll overlay exactly with this element. And this element size is based on all of its content. And its content is this image right here. So hopefully that makes sense. If not, we'll get a lot more practice with this whenever we do CSS. Positioning is one of the topics we'll be covering, or at least recovering a little bit. So Absolute positioning is pretty cool. You can basically use coordinates to place elements around your page, and then whatever the relative position of the parent is where they'll land. And that's how we built this little script here. We created this div, and we overlaid it with the coordinates of the element so that it lands right on top of the actual areas. And now it's working perfectly. So gives you something to play with a little bit there whenever you're looking at it. And if you wanted to, you could put these shapes specifically on certain items on specific images. You don't have to use the random images. If we go to unsplash.com, you can search for something like a top-down view, kind of like that desk on W3. We can just look for computer. Maybe we can find a specific picture. Here's a desk. There's a laptop. Kind of like the W3 schools example where you click on the computer or you click on this. Maybe you do it with a graph. Let's see if here's a bar graph. You could make it so when you click on this rectangle, it does a certain thing, and so on through. Each bar on the graph would be a different link, or maybe it would do a pop-up, a modal, whatever you want to include. Let me get into the actual assignment so you can actually see what we're doing here. Today's the third assignment. No, that's last week. There we go. And I'll switch my view so I can actually open up the instructions. All right. So we are going to have the heading on here. Let me back up a little bit. We'll get to the beginning. We're going to be creating another new repo. Again, it's every day this week. There'll be a new repo. First thing you want to do when you create your repo is deploy it to GitHub Pages. Every time you create a new repo, just instantly deploy it to GitHub Pages, even if you're not going to be using it in a deployed manner. It's just a good habit to have it on GitHub Pages so that you can test things to make sure things are working correctly. Initialize it with a README so you can clone it. If you don't initialize it with a README, then you'll have to do a git init locally and then bind it to your remote. So it's just easier to create it with a README and then clone it down. Choose an image from Unsplash that has multiple distinct items or areas. So it could be that graph I showed. You could find the top-down picture of a desk. It doesn't have to necessarily be from Unsplash. If you have an image you want to use, feel free to use it. Just make sure you upload it into your repo or put it in your repo folder whenever you link it in. Use whatever image you want. We just say Unsplash here so that you have a place to start. It doesn't have to be Unsplash. If you want to use some sort of graph, you can go into Excel if you're good with Excel, create a graph, and then take a screenshot of that, paste it in, and then put your map on top of that as well. You will have an index.html. That'll be your entry point. We'll have a heading describing the image map. The chosen image, again, it doesn't have to be from Unsplash, but if it is from Unsplash, also make sure you put attribution to the Unsplash author. That's one of the Unsplash requirements. So be sure to include that. You can do that in a code comment, you can do that in the alt text, and you can do that in the README. However you do that, it doesn't really matter as long as you're giving that attribution. We'll be creating out the map, the clickable area, and some code comments explaining it. As far as the shape goes, whatever shape makes sense for your image, just go with that. If you need a polygon, put it in there. If you need a circle, you can use that. Or if you need a rectangle, you can use that. So just base it around the image. We're not looking for any specific requirements on what type of shape it's going to be. Just make sure that it's kind of close to wherever you're trying to crop out of that image. Again, there's going to be some trial and error with your coordinates. Just kind of think it through. It starts with width, and then it goes to height, and then it goes to the other direction, and then it goes from top to bottom. So if you need a reminder on how it works, we have that script inside of the thread there. So you can throw in that little bit of JavaScript. You may have to adjust it for whatever it is you're building. because the ID on image map is not going to be probably your ID, so make sure you just make that small adjustment to it. And query selector is fine. And then make sure you wrap your entire thing in a div and set it to position relative if you're using that script to test things out. Does anyone have any questions about the assignment? All right, I'm going to open the breakout rooms. If you don't have questions, feel free to head right in. If you don't go into the breakout room right away, you can ask your questions then. It doesn't really matter for that. All right, breakout rooms are open. Let me adjust that timer. I just have it set to 15 minutes. So we're going to want to do 60 minutes. I'll stop recording.